November 11, 1918. At exactly 11:30 a.m., the guns on the Western Front fell silent. For 4 years, France had lived inside artillery fire. Villages erased, fields cratered beyond recognition, entire generations reduced to names on stone. When the armistice was signed, church bells rang across the country, soldiers embraced in the streets, Paris erupted in celebration. France had won. That was the story told to the world. But beneath the cheers was something harder to describe. Exhaustion so deep it felt permanent. France did not feel victorious. It felt drained. The war had not been fought on distant soil. It had been fought inside France. More than half of all fighting on the Western Front took place on French land. Railways were shattered, mines flooded, factories dismantled or destroyed. Entire regions, once industrial engines, were reduced to rubble, and France had paid for every day of it. Before the war, France was one of the world's largest creditors. French savings financed railways in Russia, industry in Eastern Europe, and infrastructure across the globe. Paris was a capital of money. By 1918, that position was gone. France had emptied its treasury to survive. At the start of the war, French leaders believed victory would be quick. Weeks, maybe months. No one planned for a 4-year industrial slaughter that consumed shells by the millions and men by the generation. So France borrowed. At first, it borrowed from its own people. War bonds, patriotic subscriptions, savings poured into the state. Then that wasn't enough. France turned to Britain, then to the United States. By the end of the war, France owed enormous sums, not only for weapons and supplies, but for food, fuel, shipping, and raw materials it could no longer produce fast enough. Victory came with a bill, and that bill arrived immediately. France expected reparations from Germany to cover the cost. This expectation wasn't greed, it was necessity. Without German payments, France's finances did not balance. Its currency was fragile. Inflation loomed. Reconstruction required capital France no longer had. The Treaty of Versailles was shaped by this reality. French negotiators were not obsessed with punishment for revenge. They were obsessed with payment, coal shipments, industrial equipment, cash transfers. Germany had to pay because France could not afford not to make it pay. But there was a problem. Germany was broke too. The war had destroyed Europe's entire financial system. Everyone owed everyone else money. Britain owed the United States. France owed Britain and the US. Germany owed everyone, and the only country with real liquidity left was America. This created a fragile chain. Germany would pay France, France would pay Britain, Britain would pay the United States. If any link failed, the entire system collapsed. France built its post-war economy around this assumption. Reparations were not a bonus, they were the foundation. Meanwhile, France faced a quieter, deeper loss. Demographics. France lost nearly 1.4 million men killed, millions more wounded. The casualties were not evenly distributed. They were concentrated among young men. The workforce, the future, the backbone of industry and families. France emerged victorious with fewer workers, fewer consumers, and fewer taxpayers. The land was damaged, the people were gone, the debts remained. Still, optimism lingered. France believed that peace would allow rebuilding, that once factories restarted and fields were cleared, prosperity would return, that Germany's payments would stabilize everything. But the structure underneath was unstable. France had won a war of survival, but survival had come at the cost of flexibility. The economy that emerged was cautious, conservative, and defensive. Money flowed toward rebuilding what had been lost, not investing in what could be new. Banks became risk-averse. Industry focused inward. Innovation slowed. Victory had preserved France, but it had also frozen it. And beneath it all, the debt clock was ticking. France was alive, but it was already living on borrowed time. The war ended, but for France, the struggle simply changed shape. The ruins had to be rebuilt. Rail lines relaid, bridges reconstructed, entire towns reimagined from scratch. The scale was overwhelming. This was not economic growth, it was economic repair. Reconstruction consumed resources but created little surplus. France poured money into restoring what existed before 1914, not into transforming its economy for the future. That choice felt logical. People wanted normal life back, familiar streets, familiar industries. But while France rebuilt the past, the world moved forward. Across the Atlantic, the United States surged ahead. Its factories had expanded during the war, untouched by destruction. Its financial system emerged stronger than ever. America became the center of global credit. France, meanwhile, remained dependent. German reparations were supposed to be the solution. At first, payments came slowly. Then they stopped. Germany's economy faltered under the strain. Inflation exploded. The mark collapsed. France reacted with force. In 1923, French troops occupied the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany, to seize coal and industrial output directly. It was an act of desperation disguised as authority. The occupation did not bring stability, it brought chaos. German resistance crippled production. International markets panicked. Relations with Britain and the United States soured. France gained coal, but lost trust. And still, the money didn't add up. Behind the scenes, France was trapped between two pressures. On one side, the need to collect reparations to service its own debts. On the other, growing international pressure to ease Germany's burden to stabilize Europe. France stood alone more often than it realized. While Britain and America focused on restoring global trade, France focused on security. Economic fragility made France cautious. Every crisis reinforced the belief that stability, not growth, was the priority. This shaped everything. French governments resisted inflation at all costs. They defended the franc fiercely even when it hurt exports. They avoided bold reforms. The economy became rigid, protected, inward-looking. On paper, France looked stable. In reality, it was brittle. When the global economy faltered in 1929, France initially appeared resilient. Its conservative banking system slowed the immediate impact of the Great Depression. But that delay was not protection. It was denial. When the crisis arrived fully, it hit hard. Exports collapsed, industrial output fell, unemployment rose, and once again, France lacked flexibility. The same caution that preserved stability after the war now prevented adaptation. The debt from World War I was still there. The demographic losses were still there. The dependence on external payments was still there. France had won the last war, but it was losing the economic peace. And as the 1930s progressed, another danger emerged. Germany was recovering, not economically healthy, but politically radicalized. The same pressures France had tried to enforce now fueled resentment across the Rhine. And France, exhausted and cautious, found itself unable to respond dynamically. Its economy was not built for rapid mobilization anymore. Its society was tired. Its leadership was defensive. France had survived World War I by sacrificing its economic future for immediate survival. Now, that future was arriving, and France was unprepared. By the early 1930s, France had learned a hard lesson. Speed was dangerous. Every time Europe moved quickly, financially, politically, militarily, France paid the price. Hyperinflation in Germany, market crashes abroad, sudden shifts in alliances. For France, volatility meant vulnerability. So France chose stillness. That choice would define everything that followed. Economically, France doubled down on caution. Budgets were balanced aggressively. Credit was restricted. Government spending was controlled not to stimulate growth, but to prevent collapse. Where other nations experimented with expansion, France focused on preservation. This mindset crept quietly into military thinking. France did not believe the next war would be lost because of bravery or tactics. It believed it would be lost because of exhaustion, because of another 4-year grind that the economy could not survive. The scars of World War I were not theoretical. Entire ministries still tracked war pensions, widows' payments, and medical costs from the last conflict. Every budget meeting was haunted by numbers from the trenches. France could not afford another long war, so it planned not to fight one. Instead, France planned to end the next war quickly or prevent it from expanding at all. This logic gave birth to a single idea that absorbed enormous economic resources: defense through immobility, concrete, steel, and certainty. The Maginot Line was not built out of fear alone. It was built out of accounting. Every kilometer of fortification was calculated as cheaper than mobilizing millions of men. Every bunker was an investment designed to reduce future costs. France wasn't preparing to lose. It was preparing to not bleed again. Behind the scenes, the numbers mattered more than the rhetoric. France's population was smaller than Germany's and aging faster. Its industrial base was stable but not rapidly scalable. Its financial system could not tolerate prolonged disruption. Another drawn-out war would destroy what remained of its economic balance. So France built walls. Not because it lacked imagination, but because it lacked margin. The Maginot Line represented an economy that preferred certainty over flexibility. Once built, it required fewer men to hold. Once financed, it promised predictability. It transformed war into a fixed cost rather than an open-ended gamble. Critics would later mock it as a symbol of stagnation. But at the time, it was rational. France was trying to turn war into a manageable expense. What France underestimated was how deeply this economic mindset affected everything else. Investment shifted toward defense infrastructure rather than mobile forces. Innovation slowed in areas that required risk. Command structures favored caution and procedure. Decision-making became layered, deliberate, and slow. This wasn't incompetence. It was economic discipline turned into doctrine. France had learned from 1914 that improvisation was expensive, from 1918 that victory could bankrupt a nation, and from the 1920s that dependency made survival fragile. So it locked itself into a system that promised control. But control has a cost. The more rigid France became, the less it could adapt. The economy stabilized, but it also ossified. When change came, France was prepared for the wrong kind of threat. Germany did not plan to bleed France dry again. Germany planned to bypass the bill entirely. France had won the last war by absorbing punishment and enduring longer than the enemy. This time, endurance itself was the liability. And the economy that had survived World War I by slowing down had unknowingly trained itself to lose the next one. By the late 1930s, France looked calm on the surface. Its currency was stable, its cities were rebuilt, its institutions functioned. Compared to the chaos of the interwar years elsewhere, France appeared orderly, almost reassuring. But stability can hide weakness. France's economy had become deeply risk-averse. Growth was modest. Productivity gains lagged behind competitors. Investment favored preservation over transformation. This created a society that valued security above speed. And war does not reward security. While France focused on defending what it had, Germany focused on changing how war worked. German rearmament wasn't just about tanks and planes. It was about tempo, rapid decision-making, fast mobilization, economic flexibility aimed entirely at momentum. France could not match that. Not because it lacked factories, but because it lacked confidence in disruption. Every French mobilization plan was shadowed by the memory of 1914. The fear was not invasion alone, it was economic unraveling. How long could the economy hold? How quickly would debt spiral? How soon would civilian life fracture? Those fears slowed everything. France still believed time was its ally. But time had changed. When Germany moved in 1940, it did not test France's courage. It tested its system. The Maginot Line held exactly as designed. French units fought bravely where they were placed. But the war did not go where France expected. Germany moved faster than France could calculate. The economic mindset that once saved France now betrayed it. Decisions that required speed ran into layers of caution. Commanders waited for confirmation. Ministries debated logistics. Mobilizations struggled against procedural drag. This wasn't cowardice. It was an economy trained to avoid sudden shocks. France had spent 20 years building a system to prevent collapse through endurance. Germany ended the war by making endurance irrelevant. The tragedy is not that France lost quickly, it's that France lost efficiently. The collapse did not come with economic ruin. It came with administrative paralysis. The system France built to survive long wars could not handle short ones. France's defeat in 1940 was not a failure of bravery, intelligence, or preparation. It was the delayed consequence of how it survived victory in 1918. The debt, the demographics, the caution, the fixation on stability. All of it traced back to the same choice, sacrificing future flexibility to survive the present. France did not lose because it forgot how to fight. It lost because it remembered too well what the last war had cost. And when war returned in a new form, the economy that had kept France alive quietly ensured it could not adapt fast enough. France won World War I, but the price of that victory shaped everything that followed. And in the end, it was not defeat that destroyed France's position in Europe. It was the cost of surviving the last time. France did not disappear after 1940. That is the most misunderstood part of this story. It fought on, it liberated itself, it emerged on the winning side of World War II, but it never fully recovered what it had lost after winning the first one. The defeat of 1940 was dramatic, but the real transformation happened afterward, quietly, administratively, and almost politely. After 1945, France returned to the table of great powers, but it did so differently than before. Its economy had been hit again, its infrastructure damaged again, its population strained again. Yet, unlike 1918, France no longer believed endurance alone could restore its position. The illusion was gone. The world France re-entered after World War II was no longer European-centered. Power had shifted across the Atlantic. The United States now financed reconstruction, dictated trade frameworks, and shaped global institutions. France did not resist this. It could not afford to. The Marshall Plan stabilized France's economy, modernized industry, and helped rebuild confidence. But it also confirmed a reality that would have been unthinkable before 1914. France was no longer a financial center of gravity. It was a participant, not a driver. This was the final cost of World War I. France's economy, shaped by decades of caution, had preserved society, but it had surrendered initiative. Where once French capital flowed outward, now it flowed inward under supervision. Where once France financed others, now it depended on external systems for stability. This was not humiliation. It was adaptation. France rebuilt its economy faster after World War II than after World War I, precisely because it abandoned the illusion of independent dominance. Planning replaced improvisation. Integration replaced isolation. The irony is sharp. France recovered by doing what it had avoided after 1918, changing its system. But that recovery came with limits. France's global empire began to fracture. Maintaining overseas control required resources, flexibility, and political will that the economy could no longer sustain indefinitely. Decolonization was not just moral or political. It was financial. Each overseas crisis was a reminder of margins that no longer existed. France's leaders understood this even when rhetoric suggested otherwise. Power was no longer measured by territory alone. It was measured by productivity, innovation, and influence within systems larger than any single nation. France adapted again. It helped build Europe. The European project was, in many ways, France's answer to its own limitations. By embedding itself in a larger economic structure, France regained stability without needing dominance. Shared markets reduced risk. Shared institutions softened shocks. This was not weakness. It was realism earned through pain. France's post-war economy became stronger than its interwar one, but also more modest in ambition. The age of unilateral power was over, and all of it traced back to the same moment. Victory that preserved the nation but consumed its flexibility. France learned, slowly and expensively, that survival and leadership are not the same thing. History often asks the wrong question. It asks, who won? France won World War I. That answer is correct and incomplete. The better question is, what did winning cost? For France, victory meant borrowing the future to survive the present. It meant sacrificing demographic strength, financial independence, and economic agility in exchange for immediate survival. Those were rational choices. They were also irreversible. France emerged from World War I intact, but altered. Its economy became defensive. Its institutions became cautious. Its strategy became about avoiding catastrophe rather than shaping outcomes. For a time, that worked. It stabilized the nation. It prevented collapse. It preserved society. But it also narrowed options. When the world changed, when speed, flexibility, and innovation mattered more than endurance, France found itself constrained by the very systems that had once saved it. This is not a story of incompetence. It is a story of trade-offs. France chose survival over transformation, stability over risk, certainty over momentum. It built an economy designed to endure punishment, not one designed to adapt to surprise. That is the deeper lesson of France's story. Empires do not decline only through defeat. They can also decline through survival. By paying the full cost of World War I up front, financially, demographically, psychologically, France secured its existence but limited its future influence. Victory preserved the nation, but it changed its role in the world. And that is the quiet truth history rarely emphasizes. France won World War I, but it paid for that victory with the century that followed.